Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Welcome to the Basu Godin Notebook, everybody, on this Friday, November 8th. I am Marc-Antoine Godin in Montreal, alongside Arpin Basu in Toronto. So,
big smoke. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So you're there for
Big
the
weekend.
game, but your game also for the Hall of Fame weekend.
Yeah. Big weekend. Shea Weber going in. So here for that. I'm not going to be here for the actual induction, which is on Monday, which the Canadiens are obviously playing in Buffalo at 12:30 on Monday afternoon, because our neighbors to the south make it a holiday to celebrate Veterans Day or Memorial Day, which we do not in Canada for Remembrance Day, which is wrong. But anyhow, it's big weekend. Obviously, Hockey Night in Canada, Leafs Canadiens, big show on Saturday. Shea Weber doing all the Hall of Fame stuff over the weekend. I'm going to chat with him at some point, and then obviously he gets inducted on Monday night. But we're gonna talk about that on our Monday episode because it'll be closer to his actual induction.
Sure. Yeah. So for today, listen, let's. There's so many things wrong with this team. The continued errors on defense, all those goals that seem to be given up, in similar fashion night after night.
Mm-hmm.
The long shifts from certain offensive-oriented players. There are things that you can moan and groan about until the cows come home. But let's try to identify some positives just to give ourselves a breather a little bit. How about we start with that? Because I think that when you hear the Canadiens talk about the way they've been playing, at least the last couple of games, even though they're in a 5-game losing streak or a winless streak, say hi to Pierre Lebrun. So a 5-game
No, it's a losing streak. It's a losing streak, Pierre. They have lost 5 games in a row. Yes.
Yeah, they certainly have not won them or tied them, so I guess they lost them.
Yeah.
So 5-game losing streak, it cannot be great, but the last couple of games, at least you can sense that there's a certain level of encouragement from the players. You hear it also from Martin Saint-Louis. Is it warranted? Do you see that there's some sort of a light at the end of the tunnel there in the way they play?
Yeah, well, I think it would be normal for some fans to hear Martin St. Louis and the players after the game in New Jersey last night looking at the positives, and that's what we're doing here. So maybe those same fans will be annoyed. But from Martin's point of view, he hammered them pretty good in Washington. Bag skated them, an unprecedented kind of tool from the coach being used. And I think less legitimately in Pittsburgh, he saw that as a positive. And as it turns out, it kind of was, looking back on it, because the Canadiens built on that performance, even though they lost that game in Pittsburgh. But they played a very, we've gone over it, super responsible, boring, risk-free game. Lost on a couple of goals by Sidney Crosby, and we're in the game. But Calgary found a better balance between that dull, kind of soulless hockey that they played in Pittsburgh and started to add some elements of creativity. Had their best first period of the season in that game, but against, let's be honest, a lesser opponent, a team that's searching for itself as well, and had been on a pretty bad run walking into the Bell Center. So, you shouldn't take too many moral victories out of being in the game against Calgary, but they were in overtime, and what happened. And then last night against a really good Devils team that I think is really priming itself to be a serious player this year. Yeah. The Canadiens could have crumbled after giving up that early goal, which came on a defensive zone breakdown. I know that Jari Slafkovsky lost his stick, but the reality is that the play the Devils made to get Jack Hughes the puck in high ice made it clear that they understood where the Canadiens were struggling in their defensive zone. They went low to high. The guy who was low went high, got the puck back, and all of a sudden there was no one in front of him. It was a guy without a stick. That was unlucky. But to me, he had a clear lane to the net, and that was created by the Devils understanding where the Canadiens have struggled defensively. So we're not harping on that. We're going to talk about the positives, and the positives are that they did not crumble after giving up the first 2 goals. They were very competitive in that game. Sheldon Keefe mentioned after the game how the Canadiens were better in the neutral zone than they were, and how he didn't like a whole lot about their game. And so I think the Canadiens do deserve some credit for going toe-to-toe with a tough opponent, and following those first 2 goals had some legitimate breaks go against them. You know, David Savard clearly tripped in the defensive zone, no call. They get an odd man the other way. And so...
Yeah, but if I can just mention on that, though, yes, he got tripped, but had he not fallen, it would still have been an odd man rush. It would have been a 3-on-2 instead of a 3-on-1, though. But it would have been...
Well, yeah. Well, that's it. And plus, the 3-on-1 got defended. It was how they sorted it out after the 3-on-1. That was the issue. Yeah. So, again, but we're trying to be positive, Marc-Antoine. We're sticking to the positive. Yes. Yeah. So really, so what it is, so one thing, I know it's hard. This is very difficult right now, but so after practice on Wednesday, at the end of Martin's scrum, he had mentioned the other night against Calgary how he would have liked it if in the second period the Canadiens started their offensive zone more often, partir notre zone offensive. Yeah. And so after practice on Wednesday, just as the scrum was ending, I just wanted to ask him, like, what did you mean by starting your offensive zone? Like, what does that look like? And whenever you ask Marty like a real hockey question, like he was like walking away and he stopped and he went on. He gave a pretty long response to the question, I think to the dismay of the Canadiens PR who were trying to get the guys out of there. But explained how they did have a plane to catch, even though it's a private plane and it pretty much only leaves when they get there. But regardless, he went on to explain that starting the offensive zone means, you know, going in, getting a puck, popping it out of a battle, and maybe there's another battle after that, but getting it out of battle situations into space where you have possession and just working possession, basically. And the trick to that is getting the puck back up to high ice, where you can then start to break down the opponent's defense. And against Calgary, he was upset that they did that so well in the first period, but in the second period, they got impatient. Instead of trying to work the puck and possess it for a while in the offensive zone, they were trying seam passes that weren't there, that would hit a stick or would bounce somewhere, and then they would lose possession and they'd be out of the zone. Second period against the Devils, a much better team than the Flames. That's what they did. They did that consistently. So that, to me, is positive on 2 fronts. One is that they quickly made an adjustment that their coach wanted them to make, which when we were talking about being responsible with the puck, not turning it over, you know, how long did we hear Martin talk about that? And it took a bag skate for the Canadiens to understand that. So this time they understood it a lot quicker and they executed it. That's a positive. The fact that they were able to do that against a team like the Devils is another positive. And so what they need to do is to do that for 3 periods, which has been an issue all year. But still, I think the ability to not crumble after the 2-0 lead and the ability to actually execute what their coach wanted them to execute are 2 big positives that should be taken away, and that seemingly were taken away by the players and the coach after that game.
Well, being able to gain possession deep in the zone is also establishing your forecheck, and I think that they've been better at doing that in those 2 instances. First period against Calgary, second period against New Jersey. But I don't mean this. I don't mean to be too cynical about it, but it's pretty much reproducing what the other teams are doing to them. You know, when you talk
to be
about
positive, Marc-Antoine.
No, I know.
Try to be positive.
I know, but I'll always remain lucid, though. So, but that's okay. I mean, if there are indeed a lot of teams that play that hybrid defense, it means that the openings will come in similar fashion, which means that if you are able to attract enough defenders around the goal line or even below the goal line, and you can move up the puck up ice, then it opens up maybe something around the house. That's something that they can exploit, and they sure did in those last two games. Hopefully that they can sustain that. I think among the good news, Brendan Gallagher is a great story. I hope that it's going to keep up, but I mean, he scored his sixth goal of the season last night against New Jersey. It took him 2 more months last year to score his sixth goal of the season. It happened on January 6th. So he got his sixth goal of the season on November 7th this time around. And he's playing with a lot of energy. Earlier this week, Josh Anderson said that he's been our most consistent player. And it's great for someone that's been written off, who's been also critiqued so much by the fans. Obviously, his contract being considered an anchor, the fact that a lot of people were mentioning the fact that he was getting so slow and got so tired in the middle of his shifts. Right now, we don't see that. I mean, I went to check his average shift length. It has not changed compared to last season. So he's still at 47 seconds on average, which is shorter than a lot of his teammates. But yes. I think that he understands his window. He understands that above that number, that's where he gets in danger. But he's skating routes that probably enables him to not waste his energy. And but he's been able to attack both in a way. Marty keeps saying how he plays within his concepts, but also you recognize the Gallagher of old in the way that he scores his goal. And that's refreshing. You cannot entirely rebuild a guy's identity, but I think that we see a very healthy compromise of a guy playing the way that the coach wants, but not getting lost into who he is. And I think that's if it could continue like that, it'll be a pleasant surprise for the Canadiens this season.
Well, I think it's taken Brendan Gallagher 2 years to find that balance, right? He and Josh Anderson were Marty's arguably two big, along with Juraj Slafkovsky, obviously, but they're his two biggest kind of transformation projects. And they both took to it in different ways. And I think Josh Anderson this season decided that I'm just going to go back to who I was and I'll incorporate some things that Marty wants. And I think Marty too has recognized that it was too much for him and that he needed to take a step back and just get back to who he was. Brendan, on the other hand, I think has legitimately incorporated. How many times have we seen him pop out into space? How many passes has he made that we've never seen him make before? How many times has he shot from distance? The goal he scored the other night that got called back on the offside. I mean, that's a goal that we generally didn't see from Brendan Gallagher. You know, these are there are things he's doing in the offensive zone that did not go with the MO of the prime Brendan Gallagher, but he still can incorporate those elements. And Marty has said it countlessly that he doesn't always have to be F1. He doesn't always have to be at the net front, you know, and we're seeing that from him. But I think one of the key things you mentioned, shift length, you know, I think there's a temptation. Oh, Brendan Gallagher's going so well. Oh, Suzuki and Caulfield need a winger. Why don't they try Brendan Gallagher? And that would be a big mistake, in my opinion. It would be a huge mistake. So you look at his ice time last night was 14:38. Average shift length, 51 seconds. Perfect. His ice time has not gone above 15 minutes in his last 6 games. It's only gone above 15 minutes 4 times all season. That 15-minute mark to me is a ceiling. You should not go over that number, I think, with Brendan Gallagher at this. If you want to get the most out of Brendan Gallagher, he needs the gas in the tank to do it. And getting him anywhere, even a second over 15 minutes. And last night it was close. If he'd had one more shift, he would have gone over. But I think that's a key element of him remaining effective. And there's nothing wrong with having a guy who can score goals in your bottom 6. Hell, it's ideal. You know, that's what you want. You want a guy who's going to get you goals in a third line role or a fourth line role or wherever he happens to be playing. So I would avoid that temptation at all costs. Like I would, as we've mentioned, prefer to see Emil Heineman get another shot in that spot, or anyone but him, basically, and Josh Anderson, I should add. But just that's for a whole other reason. But I think in Brendan's case, where he's at right now is good, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Christian Dvorak has looked really good playing on that line with him and Josh Anderson. Like the prime Brendan Gallagher was the play driver, was one of the best play drivers in the NHL, had some of the best play driving metrics in the league. And his metrics this season are right back in that territory, you know? And so it's like, he's doing things that make it so that he plays in the offensive zone more often, but the goals are a just reward. And I really loved his reaction after the game in New Jersey saying, like, I've done all these things and it hasn't gone in. So I'm just going to keep doing these things, whether it goes in or not. I'm going to stick to my process, and that's the way he should view it, because it can go. The goals can go at any moment, but as long as you're still playing within the same parameters that you're playing in consistently, and as Anderson said, and I would agree with him that he's been the most consistent forward, he should just focus on that, and I think that's what he's done.
In the past we used to see a lot of Gallagher being dejected after losses. He would take it so personally, deep to his heart.
He would just talk at this volume. He would talk very softly and just talk very soft.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. But now I feel I see a difference this year. There seems to be a more philosophical Brendan Gallagher, who's really
see the big picture.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that he removes himself from his situation. He does not, and he's still very much involved in this team. But I see a change in his overall perspective, and I think that there's I don't know if it's just because of where he sees himself at the point he sees himself in his career, or the point he sees the team. Maybe a bit of both. But have you noticed that change a little bit in how he handles games? He
doesn't speak in that low volume anymore. He comes out after losses, and this is, again, we're trying to be positive, but this is a double-edged sword. You want to have that perspective. You want to know where the team is at. It's a rebuilding team. You accept that. But I think this might be what a lot of people might have the impression right now, that losing has become somewhat acceptable. I mean, you hear Brendan, the last two games, came out, spoke, saw the positives in the loss, was able to digest it. Jake Evans last night talking about how it was our most complete game, and I don't disagree. But you'd like to see someone angry about the loss, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the double-edged sword. Is that yes, you have to keep perspective. Yes, you have to understand where the team is at. And yes, I think in a situation like last night, you should take the positives out of that game. But when it's your fifth straight loss, you can't be overly satisfied, right? So but sometimes you need, in Brendan's case, I guess you got to read the room as a veteran. So maybe that is a pervasive kind of feeling in the room. And he's taking his role as a veteran to say, no, hang on, wait a minute, guys. Yes, we've lost 5 in a row, but we're making improvements. We're improving. And if we keep improving, the wins will come. Stick with the process. Don't worry about it, kind of thing. And if everyone's overly accepting of the loss, that's when you get angry and be like, no, guys, we can't, so maybe there's a bit of that going on. But yeah. But I agree with you. Listen, he signed the contract he signed, which was offered to him, and he would have been crazy to not sign it. But he saw where the team was heading. He sees Shea Weber and Carey Price leave, and that all of a sudden the team he signed with is vastly different than what he thought it would be. I think it took him a while to just recognize that A, the team is going to rebuild. B, it's going to take a long time. So I can't be doom and gloom after every loss. Like I just can't, because we're going to lose. And now, I think the team, everyone on the team expects to win more often this season. It hasn't happened yet. And, they're still, they're pretty relatively deep into the season. Like it's not deep, but still 14 games is a good chunk of the season. Maybe we'll see a shift there, but for now, I agree. He's been able to see the big picture much more than he used to as a younger guy, for sure.
He looks like an assistant captain who's extending the message of the coach.
Yes,
so
that's exactly what he looks like.
Yeah, but mentioning his contract and the fact that the Canadiens went into a rebuild shortly after, some guys. And I feel like Tyler Toffoli was in that situation where they could say, do I want to be a part of this or not?
Yeah.
But since Gallagher went into hurdles of his own, and he had a dip in his performances, extended dip, he had injuries and whatnot, he did not put himself in a position where he had the luxury of saying, do I want to be a part of this or not? So he's with the Canadiens for the foreseeable future, and now it's as though it finally reconnected that where the team is at and where he's at. There's an interesting compromise or affinity because they need those veteran players and they need effective veteran players. So it's great because he's the one guy from the older generation who carries the brand of the Montreal Canadiens, who's got such a good understanding of what it means to be a Montreal Canadiens. There's a lot that he can explain and teach to the younger players because he's got a vast experience of that. But he has to be useful to be heard, to be listened to, and to remain credible. And his level of effectiveness this season so far is great to see.
Yeah.
I know also that you wanted, in terms of positive, you wanted to mention Jayden Struble.
I did want to mention Jayden Struble, and I thought there were multiple times last night where Jayden Struble wound up on the ice with Lane Hutson. The pairings were kind of all over the place throughout the game. And I found two things about Jayden Struble. One, we've heard Marty talk about defensive pace. And it's a concept that, I was having trouble really understanding. If you watched Jayden Struble last night, I think that was an example of defensive pace. Being aggressive, killing a play, having a good stick, being right tight on your man, just having a sense of urgency about defending. And there were multiple examples in the game last night where I thought he did that. Two, we've been talking quick hits, big hits. I mean, he's just his energy defensively is good. It's a good energy. Yeah. And I found that when he played with Hutson, what struck me is that ideally Lane Hutson's defense partner would be able to skate well, particularly skate back well is really what you want. And David Savard is simply not that. And so I found there were stretches in that game where Struble was with Hutson and Savard wound up with Jacky, who I think has also shown a lot of improvement in the last few games. He's been much, much better. That's encouraging. And I just found that combination allows Marty to keep Matheson and Gouli together, which he seems to value as being his top shutdown type pair against the top opponents. And I find that to be a better mix of the bottom four, if you will, where you have Hutson. If Struble can continue playing this way, being as defensively effective as he is, but his foot speed that allows him to get back in the instances invariably where Hudson's going to turn the puck over in the offensive zone and people have to get back to cover for it. Having a skater like Struble is a better fit, but he has to play the way he did last night. And I thought he was really, really effective in the defensive zone. And Jacky Savard, I feel, is a good fit because when the play is in the defensive zone, not in transition, but when the other team is set up in the defensive zone, if Jacky were to make an error, which he's been prone to do this season, you have a good backup once you're in the defensive zone in Savard, which is, I think, largely why he's playing with Hudson. But Hudson's issue is not in the defensive zone. It's actually turning pucks over in the offensive zone. And in that case, you kind of need a guy that's more like Struble than Savard to help cover for that stuff. So I think Jayden Struble's been is showing a good arc and is quickly, and we've mentioned this already, but is quickly showing an identity that he's going to hope will lead to a solid NHL career. And we're seeing it kind of manifest. He knows what it is. He needs to be a hard defender. He needs to have a good stick, and he needs to be physical. And I feel he's doing those things. And I thought he was really good against New Jersey. And I think that pairing is something that should be revisited.
Yeah, well, we've seen Hudson with Gouli for in a little small moments and small bits in the past, and I think it looked very situational. Mm-hmm. Like the Canadiens were behind, they needed a goal at a certain time in the game, and I feel as though the pairings yesterday were managed in similar fashion. It was more like later in the periods that we would see Struble and Hudson together. But at first, it seems as though they start with a certain mindset, a certain mentality where they're going to pair Hudson and Savard, because Savard sitting on the bench next to him can give him some tips, and there's maybe a security blanket to start the game. And at some point, if the situation arises where you need to get more active because you're playing from behind, then that's when Struble would come in and be paired with Hudson. It's the risk there, though. It's you've got two inexperienced defenders together, and it can be exploited by.
Well, you're going to have two together anyway. They have three on the defense. There's no combination unless you split up Savard, Gouli, and Matheson. But if you insist on having Gouli and Matheson together, there has to be two inexperienced defenders together, and it's been Struble and Jacky, and that's why instead of Struble and Jacky, I think it'd be better if it'd be Struble and Hudson.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we mentioned it on the pod, but we definitely discussed it together that at some point there was a need for this team to have their third pairing elevate their play and find a way to have a potent third pairing, because
or a competent one.
You need, you'll need to take minutes away from Hudson at some point in the season. Yes. I think that it's because otherwise, just by the sheer number of games that he's going to play, and as good as he's been and as good as he can potentially be, and as good a play driver he is also, there's a risk of burning him out. So in order, I don't think that they're going to start scratching him or do some load management with him. I'd be surprised if they did that. I don't think that they have the luxury
I don't think they can do that, yeah.
But what they can do, though, is hope that the guys that are on the third pairing can grasp a few more minutes of ice time each game, and in an incremental process, you are able to scale back a little bit how Hudson is used, just so that you can arrive at the end of the season and he's still playing some decent hockey, because you want to be able to protect your asset in that sense. So seeing Struble establishing his game, seeing Jacky getting better, those are encouraging signs. So because that moves along that way.
But I also look at Savard in a similar way that we were talking about Gallagher. And even Martin St. Louis said early in the season, we want to manage his minutes. We don't want him playing as much. He played 19 minutes last night, but close to 4 of them were on the penalty kill. So if he's going to play as much as he obviously will on the penalty kill, putting him in a third pairing role allows the Canadiens to do what they set out to do at the beginning of the season, which was manage his minutes. And so, listen, I don't know why that happened. In terms of seeing Savard with Jacky for a few shifts and seeing Struble with Hudson for a few shifts, but I think it's a pretty interesting formula to accomplish a lot of things. and
Yeah.
one of which being having your third pair being a competent third pair that could take on more minutes. I think Jack played just under 12 minutes last night, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 11:37.
Yeah. Yeah.
Struble was up just over 14, which I think is a sweet spot for that third pairing. If you can get 14, 15 minutes out of that third pair, you can accomplish what you're talking about. I agree with you. Lane Hutson can't be playing 27 minutes, which he did last night, over and over again. Like it's not sustainable. And that's, how many times has he been over 25? That's not too often. That's actually only the second time this season he's been over 25, but he's only played three games where he's been under 20. So I agree with you. Like, they need to keep an eye on that because that's going to catch up to him at some point. So there's Hudson's minutes, there's Savard's minutes, and there's upping the younger guys, Struble and Jacky, that all can get accomplished, I think, if you align it the way we saw last night in Jersey. And I thought it was effective whenever they did that.
Yeah, Jacky, granted, it was in limited ice time, but for the majority of the game, he had an expected goals against of 0. So for the majority of the game, you stay at 0 for that. That's pretty good. You can't ask for much better than that defensively. But look, they want, if Struble establishes himself as a lefty on the right side, you already have Gouli, who's a lefty, playing on the right. They want to manage Savard minutes and not having to play him too much, let's say 22, 23 minutes. You want to keep him under 20. Right now, Justin Barron, a natural righty, is scratched and he's their seventh defenseman. Mm-hmm. The Canadiens yesterday were playing the New Jersey Devils, and among them, there was Johnathan Kovacevic, who is playing 21 minutes for the Devils. He's their most used guy on the PK, a PK that's doing very well so far this season. And you got to wonder, clearly they thought that he was a victim of, just a numbers game. But they made the decision to say, we're going to stick with Justin Barron and give him one more shot because we don't want to lose him for nothing on waivers. Mm-hmm. And we're ready to sacrifice Kovacevic. He did not play 20 of the last 49 games. So the trend had already started last season. So I'm not going to sit here and say they should not have let Kovacevic go because you look at how he's playing with New Jersey. But in a time where they're looking for righties and they're looking for guys who can stabilize their defense, it's still striking to me that all of those maneuvers have put the Canadiens in a position where they're scrambling to find ice time, securing ice time on the right side, and you've got a guy that they basically let go for not much, who really panned out on a much stronger team.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of window management going on with the Canadiens. And listen, if you go back to last season, what was the number one priority for this group going into the offseason was to lighten the load on defense. They had too many defensemen. That's all we were talking about. They needed to liquidate some of them. I hate to use that term for a human being, but still, they need to liquidate some of them and get some assets back and create room for their younger defense to learn at the NHL level. It's only, Johnathan Kovacevic, though he doesn't have a lot of experience, is an older guy. I think he might be 28 now. If I'm not mistaken. He's still 27. Anyhow, he'll be 28 this season, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, he'll be 28 in July. So he's 27. So, he was always in a different category as a guy who lacked experience, but was an older guy,
Yeah.
And so it was not shocking to see, especially with the usage that you mentioned, that he was a guy that they saw as not being part of their window eventually. Whereas even Barron, with all the sort of red flags that he showed in terms of his inconsistency, his lack of the inconsistency of his confidence, inconsistency of his defensive game, him trying to sort of redefine himself as a defensive player who has offensive attributes as opposed to the other way around, was going to take some time. It was going to be difficult, but was worth it if he actually got through that and got on the other end of it and became a guy with his offensive skill set who could be an effective defender in his own end. Now, we haven't seen it so far. Does that mean that we're never going to see it? I don't think so. But, Kovacevic, it's no surprise that the Devils were interested in him. The Devils are a highly analytically bent organization. Tyler Delaware, our old colleague at The Athletic, runs the show over there in terms of numbers. Kovacevic's underlying numbers have always been excellent. There's always been a bit of a disconnect between his underlying numbers and the eye test, I think, at least from the Canadiens' perspective. There was, and it was their attempt to evaluate how far Kovacevic was from his ceiling and compare that to how far Barron was from his ceiling, or how far Struble or whoever is still around. I think Jordan Harris fell into that category too. And there's a reason why he was included in that Laine deal. I think in part because he was making more money than some of the other young defensemen, but it was also that he was probably pretty close to his ceiling. And I think the organization saw it that way. And not to say that that's a bad thing. He's a good defenseman, but is he going to be part of this team when they hit their window? And is he going to be like a contributing part of this team when they hit their window? It's hard to say. It's hard to say if Struble will be. It's hard to say if Barron will be. It's hard. The one guy I feel most confident of the group that's here now that I think will be part of that window is Xhekaj, which is why I think they're so hard on him. That's why I think there's a lot of tough love there, because they see the potential for a guy like that to be part of their competitive window. Struble could play himself into that conversation. Barron could play himself into that conversation, but I do think that the organization looks at Xhekaj in that sense. So,
yeah.
But in order to know that, they need to play. And I think Kovacevic was a hindrance to that. Now, I think despite him being on the right side or being a right shot, I could see him being in and out of the lineup in Montreal. It's, even though they're not as good as New Jersey, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. New Jersey had injuries to start the season. Brett Pesce, who plays on their right side, your boy Brett Pesce, wasn't available at the start of the season. Was playing in a third pair role last night with Luke Hughes, who was also injured to start the season. It created an opening for Kovacevic, and good for Kovacevic. He took the opportunity, ran with it. Yeah. I think we're both big fans of him off the ice. He's a great guy to deal with, a very enjoyable person to speak with. I'm happy for him, but I don't think the Canadiens necessarily made a mistake trading him away. I think there were a lot of factors in play there, and it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to fit with this team long term, and is probably fits the Devils' window much better than he does the Canadiens' window.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a question of confidence also in terms of what role is expected out of you, and are you able to fill it. In Montreal, you mentioned, how he was an older rookie. You're right, at 25 in Montreal, and he was last year. He was the third oldest defenseman on the team after Savard and Matheson. So he was asked, maybe that he was in a potential in a situation where there was an opportunity that he could seize, and there was ups and downs. But this year, he's surrounded in New Jersey with a ton of quality, experienced defensemen. Mm. It was almost like a no pressure situation to come in. And sometimes when you don't have any pressure, but you're confident in what you can do, things start off very well for you. You just build up your confidence over and over again. And at this point, it's like you're right. He's an ideal fit for him, because even though he's been playing 21 minutes, eventually he could go back to being a third pairing guy. He could go back to being a seventh defenseman. But the fact that the surroundings in New Jersey, as I think, contributes to him being so steady. And if you were to put him in Montreal, where there's a lot more flux, a lot more uncertainty with the second youngest blue line in the NHL, it's not guaranteed that he would remain that consistent, that he would have that steadiness and that level of confidence. Because last year he struggled with it at some point.
Well, he would not have a partner like Jonas Siegenthaler, that's for sure. I mean, that's for damn sure. Like playing with Jonas Siegenthaler provides the environment that you just described, and that environment doesn't exist in Montreal. It just didn't. And so, but it's, we can't. Someone had to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone had to go.
I'm not disputing that. And the day that he was traded, everybody shrugged, and I did too. And I said, "Yeah, of course, it was to be expected." I just find it a bit, I guess, ironic that now that we would look at if somebody could be steady defensively on the right side and be able to play 20 minutes a night, how handy would that be?
Yes,
that's all.
Yes, no, it's natural, but I think those are. That is part of the process. Like, I think if Justin Barron doesn't work out on the right side, but they know that because they traded Johnathan Kovacevic and Jordan Harris, ultimately that's a win. Like you have to know these. You got to know these things. You got to find out. Again, priority number one for this season is information gathering, and they didn't need to gather information on Johnathan Kovacevic and to a lesser extent Jordan Harris. I think it's that's where they're at as a team, and they're getting that. Yeah. And speaking of information gathering, you see that? Look at that segue. So Oliver Kapanen sent back to Timrå, which I think makes a whole lot of sense. Even though I thought he looked good, but getting him into a place where he can play top minutes, top line role, power play, penalty kill, top opponents, be an important impact player on a team is a good thing. Having Olli Jokinen as a coach, longtime NHL centerman, who knows what it takes to play center at the NHL level. So having that coach there is a good thing. So the Canadiens decide, once they make that decision, which I don't know, I don't know if you agree with what I just said, but I thought that was a good decision.
For sure.
They decide to bring up Lucas Condotta. And I think a lot of people look at the Laval Rocket stat sheet and they look at the Canadiens' inability to score goals consistently and ask themselves, why would you not take this opportunity to call up Joshua Roy? I personally was glad that they left Joshua Roy in Laval. I think I haven't seen every Rocket game, I'm going to admit, but I think there's been some inconsistency in his game where he has had games where he's produced. He recently scored a hat trick. But there's been other games where he's been less visible, right? Where he's just kind of so. And I think the whole sort of Logan Mailloux experiment, where he was called up, was playing great in Laval. They call him up, didn't play great in Montreal, had to send him back down. Was something to be avoided. It's something that should generally be avoided. You would like it that players who fit that window, players you think might be a part of your team when you're good, that when you call them back up, that's it. They don't go back. They come up, they're NHL players, they stay.
It's rarely the case, though. Guys will go up and down a few times. But I agree with you, there's no rush in bringing those guys up, and it's not because you're very good in the AHL that you need to be called up right away. Continue dominate.
Yeah. But I think you're right that it happens often. I think it happens more often in Montreal than in other organizations. The yo-yoing between the AHL and the NHL. Mm-hmm. I think there are other organizations who are willing to let their players cook a little longer, and that when they come up, they're cooked and they're ready to play in the NHL. And so I think as a whole, organizationally, with the team being what it is, that consideration should be applied more often, or should become just basically a matter of policy where let's at least try to identify the proper time when, even if he's succeeded, give him a month to be like dominant, or 6 weeks to be dominant. And then when he comes up, he never has to see Laval ever again,
Yeah.
And the thing with Joshua Roy, and I wrote about this, that's interesting to me, is that before the season, he had to find a place to live. He had been subletting Alexis Lafreniere's place up on the North Shore um, last season. So that is a place you would live if you expect to play in Laval all year. So that's what he did.
They share the
This
same
year,
agent too.
I'm sorry?
They share the same agent too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this year, he didn't do that. He got a place in the city, really centrally located between the Bell Center and Place Belle. It takes almost the exact same amount of time to drive from his apartment to the Bell Center as it would to Place Belle, barring traffic. So this is something that he knew going into the season, that I am going to be in between these two places, quite literally where he lives, but in his career, that's where he's at. So the fact that he's in Laval right now comes as no surprise to him. It shouldn't come as a surprise to the fans either. Leaving him there long enough for him to really round out his game, work on the things that he needs to work on so that he gets called up to Montreal permanently, I think would be a good thing.
Yeah, it's probably a better self-assessment than Xavier Ouellet, who a few years ago, who just before he was anointed captain of the Rocket, was living in Brossard. So
Yeah, right.
he had to drive from Brossard to Laval every day.
all season, ultimately.
All season. Yeah. Just speaking of it, I smiled earlier because I was thinking of guys that were called up and sent down. Many years ago, I wrote a little tidbit about Jason Demers, former Sharks defenseman who at the beginning of his career was called up and sent down constantly, but the Sharks, who were playing in California, had their affiliate back then in Worcester, Massachusetts.
In Worcester, Mass. Yeah, absolutely.
So there was nobody, I think, in professional hockey that flew more than Jason Demers at 1 year where he was constantly yo-yoing between Massachusetts and California.
Right.
But regarding that bit of news, Condotta, by the way, did not play a bad game. The fourth line yesterday really held his own.
I thought he was good.
But
I thought he was good, all things considered. I thought he was good. 7 minutes.
Yeah.
In those 7 minutes, he was good.
But the guy I'm thinking of, you talk about Joshua Roy, when that bit of news to me is also related to Kirby Dach. Because you choose 100%. To bring up a centerman to replace Kapanen, because in your calculations right now, you count Kirby Dach as a winger. If Kirby Dach was a centerman, then you'd have Suzuki, Dach, Evans, and Dvorak, and you're set. You need a fifth centerman on the in a pinch. You've got Newhook.
Yeah.
But the fact that they chose to bring up Condotta is that for the short term, at least for the next little while, they want to keep Dach as a winger. And we had that discussion earlier this week. And Martin Saint-Louis also, I think it was on the morning of the game against Calgary, said, well, if you asked me the question 12 or 13 months ago, I would have told you that for sure Kirby Dach's a centerman. Now, well,
he said he doesn't know.
Let's just wait until we feel that he's fully back before we can make that assessment. Yeah. So to me, it's an interesting development. And there's Raphaël Harvey-Pinard, who's probably 2 or 3 weeks away from returning. He's been skating a lot with the team lately. I think that the team has been looking for a spark guy with some grit and all that. I think that he could be a good fit on that fourth line when he comes. And anyway, he's waiver eligible, so they'll think twice. Maybe apart from a conditioning stint that might delay things, they will think twice before just returning him to the American League. So that could be a guy, barring other injuries. He's a guy who could push back Kirby Dach to center if they feel as though he's progressed enough. I mean, at the end, in 5 weeks from now, maybe it might be Patrick Liney's turn. So there's many balls in the air. That's what my point is. But for now, the fact that it's Condotta rather than a winger, albeit you mentioned Joshua Roy, it could be another guy too, but it's clear that it means that they want to see more of Doc at wing, and to me, it's a statement.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it just goes back to my point on Monday. And I guess some people watching this episode wouldn't have seen the Monday episode, but it's that if Doc's a winger, the Canadiens have a problem. That's a problem. If Doc ultimately becomes a winger, not to say that that's a problem for Kirby Doc, he might become a great winger. I think he's got this, him as an offensive player or even a 200-foot player, I think remains a very attractive asset for the Canadiens as they try to put puzzle pieces together to build a competitive team. It doesn't mean that Doc would be an ineffective player. It doesn't mean Doc wouldn't be part of the Canadiens when they're competitive. But if he is not a centerman, that is a massive black hole where the Canadiens rebuild would need to fill. So yeah, I agree with you. The Condota call up and Marty basically saying simply, well, he's a centerman and we needed a centerman because Kapanen was playing center. It's not as if Kapanen was playing center all season. Kapanen only started playing center when they moved Doc to the wing.
That's right.
So yeah, I agree with you. Like that means they want to give Doc some runway on the wing, and maybe that has to do with building him back up to a point where he can go back to being an effective centerman. And maybe is a similar thing that I was talking about with Juan, Mayu, and all that stuff. Like once we move him back to center, we want him to stay at center. So he's not ready to go right now. So we could bring this guy up. He can play center for now. And then we can always send him back down once we're ready to put Doc back at center. And hopefully that's the last time we have him on the wing ever again. Maybe that's the case. If that's the case, great. Then the Canadiens are in business. But I said it on Monday. I'll say it again. The number one thing the Canadiens need to learn this season is Kirby Doc their number 2 center long term? And right now he's not.
Yeah, and it's just a good opportunity to remind our listeners and our viewers that some of you will say, well, hey, I missed Monday's discussion. I missed Monday episode. So if you don't want to miss it, then you can support us by subscribing to our podcast, because the paid subscribers get to have all the episodes, the Mondays and the Fridays. So if you want to support what we do and become a subscriber, you just go to BasuandGodin.com. That's our home base. We have a monthly plan if you just want to give it a shot. Then we have also a yearly plan if you already know that you're digging it. And our most generous subscribers are our founding subscribers. They're extremely appreciated. So please subscribe. And also, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure that you hit the subscribe button. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, well, a 5-star review is always welcome. So that was my housekeeping bit for today.
There's the business part of the podcast, and our founding members get a monthly Google Meet. And for the founding members listening to this episode, that Google Meet should be coming in the next couple of weeks. We will be reaching out with a date and time for that. But that is a good segue into Future Friday, because today's Friday, and we're going to talk about the future. Future Friday. Okay, so today's Future Friday candidate is Logan Sawyer. Logan Sawyer, third round pick. At the draft in Vegas. Was thrilled about it. Was one of the few Canadiens draft picks that was actually at the draft.
I know, right?
Yeah, but was thrilled about it. Taken 78th overall, and I got some whispers that this was a guy that kind of in the scouting community was creating a little bit of buzz, a little bit of interest, saying like, oh, this might be something, this might be a steal for the Canadiens. He's got a big body. He's about 6'2", 175 right now, but he's got the hands to go with it.
I think he's got a projectable frame. He could fill that frame.
He's still
And
growing. He's still growing.
yeah.
So I had this chance to speak with. He's playing at Providence College. He played in the BCHL last season with the Brooks Bandits,
Mm.
and is playing at Providence College right now as a freshman. And so yesterday, I had a chance to talk to the longtime coach in Providence, Nate Lehman, uh, who is pretty excited about this kid. He's a freshman. He hasn't scored a goal yet. Through 7 games, has yet to score. Recently had like a 2-assist game. It was his first
Yeah.
multi-assist game. He's got 3 points in 7 games. So doesn't jump off the page, but you look at it and, he is right now, third on the team in shots on goal, tied for third. And that's tough. I think the jump from junior A hockey in BC, which the BCHL is an excellent league, but still junior A hockey to playing as a freshman in the NCAA is a big jump, and the NCAA, high level NCAA hockey is far more, structured and far closer to NHL style hockey than some junior teams play. You're playing against older players. So, one thing Nate Lehman mentioned to me was that, they have, they have a plan for him, and and Lehman really kind of gushed about how much he likes him. He said he's added 5 pounds since the start of the season. And so, his development curve.
That's pretty good, because guys sometimes will lose weight.
Yeah.
Well, once the
So
season
he's
starts.
hitting the gym hard.
Yeah.
But he's learning to deal with, every player at some point in their career goes from being the best player on their team, which they've been their entire lives, to not being the best player on their team. And I brought this up with Nate Liam. I was like, is this something that he's just going through right now? He's like, he is, but I'll tell you one thing, like, he's not too far away from being the best player on our team. Like, he'll be the best player on our team within a year, maybe 2. Now that's saying something, because another player that he has on Providence is Trevor Connolly, who the first round pick, smaller guy, obviously had his off-ice issues and was a bit of a controversial prospect, but the talent was undeniable. Shockingly, the Vegas Golden Knights decided to go disregard the off-ice stuff and went for the market inefficiency. But that's a guy who you would think would be the future best player on this team, and he feels that Logan Sawyer has the potential to be that guy at some point, but he's not there yet. He's learning to kind of work through some things. But the good stick, the playmaking, the vision, and the one thing that Coach Lehman mentioned as being something that's really jumped out to him is the hockey IQ is off the charts. And once he gets used to the heightened pressure and urgency of the environment he's playing in, he really feels that he has real, legitimate NHL upside. So it was a really good conversation. He mentioned that already this season he's had 4 or 5 breakaways because he's really good at anticipating passes. He has like a knack for breaking up D-to-D passes. And so there's a lot of good around him. It's just that he's definitely at a stage of his development where he's learning to play at a higher level that he's not accustomed to. But I personally, based on the conversation, I wouldn't be surprised if within a month or so, we're going to start seeing Logan Sawyer highlights traveling through the Twitterverse with great regularity.
What's interesting also is that he's a guy who shoots a lot, and he was performing offensively very well with the Brooks Bandits last season. But Providence is more of a defensive-minded program, so I guess it's to develop his all-around game. You say that his numbers don't jump off the page. I mean, last season there was no. If you look at the top 50 scorers in the NCAA, you won't find anybody from Providence there. Maybe that the stats will remain subdued because of the type of hockey that's being played there, but he's going to learn a lot of good habits that would serve him well in the NHL.
100%. And that's definitely something he's learning. And I think a guy who has scored goals his whole life to go 7 games without a goal, like it's going to be an adjustment. So I think there's a lot of things that he's working on to adjust. He's going to have to learn. I think the beauty of going to any program, any NCAA program, is you get time to learn what your NHL identity will be. And we talked about Luke Tuck recently. His 4 years at BU allowed him to learn what his identity would be one day at the NHL, and then once he arrived pro, he knew, I'm going to be this guy. And it's like and he's doing that right now because it was clear in his mind. So I think Logan Sawyer is probably not going to be the prolific scorer he was as a kid at the NHL level. He's going to have to find some kind of middle ground, but the shot is excellent. And the fact that the hockey IQ is one of the first things his coach mentions about him, I think speaks very well to his chance of one day, not anytime soon, but one day, reaching the Canadiens and making an impact with this team at some point. Because the frame is there, the shot and the playmaking skills are there, but the hockey IQ being there, and creating that early impression with his new coach, I think speaks very well to his potential for the Canadiens, and it might wind up being a pretty good pick in the middle of the third round. Their second third round pick, Atosh Koivu, went before him. He went relatively late in the third round, so could wind up being something that we look back on as being a bit of a coup for the Canadiens. But let's see. There's some time to figure it out. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, when we're talking about a third round pick, if he reaches the NHL, no matter how good he is, if he becomes an NHL player, that's already a success,
Yeah.
So, and there's also a debate as to, is he going to be a centerman? Is he going to be a left winger? That's something that will need to be clarified also down the line. But do you have a sense of why he's creating that buzz among the scouting community?
Well, I think it's just the package, right? I mean, the fact he can shoot it really well. He's getting power play time. He's playing a top 9 role on the team as a freshman. He's playing on the power play. Like that's something that really usually the high end prospects get. It's not usually a third round pick is usually not playing on the power play at the Division 1 level on a pretty competitive program. Like not. So I think that's just the whole package. The combination of size and skill and IQ, I think, and just the fact that he's been visible early in the season. When his coach mentions he's had 4 or 5 breakaways already, they've only played 7 games. So it's like so that's something that scouts notice. Like this kid's getting opportunities as a freshman at a pretty high level of hockey. That's going to catch some eyes. So I think his transition to college, even though he's probably a little frustrated that he hasn't been able to score yet, I think has been pretty smooth and really is just a good sign for the Canadiens in terms of his future. And I shouldn't say, like, he wasn't taken late in the third round. He just happened to be the Canadiens' second third round pick, but he was, middle of the third round, early middle of the third round. But still, if you're able to find a player who can play in the NHL at that spot in the draft, then you've won.
And I mean, if he's got already 4 or 5 breakaways, it speaks of 2 things. First is anticipation, and second, the fact that his skating is maybe not as much of a concern as something that it might have been. So
yeah,
that's encouraging. All right. Anything else to add about me and Mr. Logan Sawyer?
No, that's all I got. But I think it's been it's just a guy that I was curious about because I kind of heard this, and it's a guy that we don't hear a lot about. Obviously, the Demidovs and the Hage and everything is kind of the priority out of that draft, and that remains so. So I'm not saying that Logan Sawyer is more important than those guys, but I think there's a story brewing in Providence that Canadiens fans should pay attention to. And although the numbers aren't there, from the sounds of it, based on what Coach Lehman said, they should come pretty soon. So keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for what Logan Sawyer is doing in Providence.
And anyway, that's what Future Friday is about. Also, I mean, to look at the different prospects. Sometimes, there's going to be guys that maybe are well off the radar, or they're not necessarily household names, but who remain to be who deserve to be talked about a little bit. So it's a good opportunity, a good window to discuss those guys. All right, so Arpin, I will let you go and go do your Shea Weber's business. You know, every time that people talk about Shea Weber and talk about just Shea, it reminds me of a longtime scout who was a former player who had not gone to Montreal in a long time. And he asked at some point, he asked me, he said, is Shea still around? And I said, well, no, he's not going to play anymore. I mean, he's injured and he's pretty much retired. And he said, no. Shea, as in Shea Paré.
Yeah. I saw that coming. Coming. Yeah.
Yeah. So the famous strip
by the way,
club
if you're wondering, if anyone who doesn't live in Montreal is wondering, it is still around. It exists.
Yeah.
And it's still doing business.
Yeah. All right. So thanks a lot for listening, everybody, and we'll talk again on Monday for our subscribers. And have a great weekend, everybody.